Right, welcome. No, I don't have a fucking thing.
All right, I can introduce this if you need a moment. We're going to be talking tonight about what is your favorite apologetics. These can range from Christian
I'm back.
only.
Oh, I am. I'm back. I'm sorry about that. As soon as I'm sorry to interrupt there. I have Okay, thank you, Hillary.
Thank you.
I love it. I love it because I do as well, except the other way around. Okay, so sorry about that. I wanted to say hello to everybody. Welcome to the show. We are on State of the Onion, Series 2, Episode 3. And I am going to pass it over. Welcome to everybody. Hillary's emails. Michael Grando, welcome. Michael, always say that. Floyd, welcome. And, of course, Nick Suter, welcome. You're only here for a short while. And now let me just pass it over to Xbox. And I will pin the link. So if anybody else wishes to come in, please join. Great. Thank you very much. Over to you, Xbox, our fantastic host.
Yeah, all right, guys. Well, we're getting into what's your favorite apologetic. This can range from, single religions to a just broad stroke of a supernatural being. The supernatural itself. Arguments from Christianity. Arguments from, specific religions. I'm sure there's plenty of them out there we can talk about. So if any of y'all have any favorites and want to throw any out, we can start there.
All right, I'm gonna have to go in like 2 minutes. So, and I told Simos my favorite. I think I'm trying to remember another one. I think there was another one that was my favorite, but so I'm gonna have to tell it and then bail. But my favorite is the so-called Hitchens argument, which Christopher Hitchens gave during the Festival of Dangerous Ideas in, I think it was I want to say 1999. That can't be right. But anyways, he gave it during the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. It was his arguments for why, at least there was evidence to suggest that Jesus was in fact real. It was a counter-mythicist argument. And basically the argument was, we know that, or we're pretty sure roughly when Jesus was born. We know that the census was over by that point, so Mary and Joseph would not have been traveling for the census. We also know that Nazareth was exempt from the census, so why would they be traveling for the census and end up in Bethlehem where Jesus was born there? He said the only reason to invent that lie, because let's assume that you're inventing Jesus Christ whole cloth, and you want this Jesus to be the Jesus that's born in Bethlehem, who is the Messiah, yada, yada, yada. Well, you just write it that way. Jesus' parents, Mary and Joseph, were from Bethlehem. He was born in Bethlehem. Done. Why in Nazareth? And then create this extra fiction. He said the only reason to create the extra fiction was if you had a real mad Jewish preacher who you wanted to fit into one of the Messiah stories. You're trying to coax him into that, but he inconveniently was born in Nazareth. So you say, well, no, he was from Nazareth, but he was born in Bethlehem because, well, they were traveling for the census and the whole 9 yards. That's the only reason to invent the fiction, was if in fact he was real, and they're trying to square the circle on that. So I love that argument. There are some issues with it, but I think it's a great argument.
Yeah, that's a good argument. Hitchens had a great mind and thinking things. So I think that is a sensible take on it, right? Like that's definitely a sensible look. And in the end, I think it gets deconstructed, but on the face of it, it's a great way to go with it.
Well,
Like,
it
I've heard.
highlights one.
Oh
It
yeah, go
highlights
ahead.
one of the great things about Hitchens, which is that he really did apply charity, and he really did want to understand and reach the truth. So if there was a good argument that made sense as to why Jesus was real, is like, he'd support it if it was a good argument, and he liked that one. So
Yeah, he definitely had integrity all around, but intellectual integrity absolutely exuded it. But um, I was trying to think of another
One
Christian argument
one
that I
of the
heard.
things I'd just quickly like to say about Hitchens, which is
Oh, yeah, go please.
misunderstood, is that people say that he was philosophically naive. Actually, his degree was in part in philosophy. A degree in politics, philosophy, and religion and economics from obviously Oxford. He was at Bailey.
Oxford.
Was it Oxford? Yeah.
Well, he
So,
graduated Oxford. I don't know if that's I wasn't aware. I don't know what his if he had a advanced degree. I don't know what it was. His BA was from Oxford, was my understanding.
well, that'll be the one because he only did that and he went straight into journalism, I think. So, but just like people say, oh, he didn't. No, he had a degree in philosophy, and so there you go. Just to point that out.
All right. Well, I hate to bail. Sorry, but I got to go. But thank you guys so much for having me on, and I will hopefully see you guys next time.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks
very
for
much for
coming.
coming on, Nick. See you soon.
My pleasure.
See you, Nick.
Bye.
Okay.
Okay. Any of the rest of y'all?
Well, I'll just say
have
one
any-
thing as well. If there's anybody
I
out
was going
there
to talk some crap
who wants,
about you.
okay, that's cool. If anybody who wants to come in, you could have done at the beginning when my headphones failed. But anyway, if anybody wants to come in, John, I would love to see you. Obviously, lucky those doubting. That's great. But it's not just what's the best apologetic for in favor of theism that we like to defend against. It could be your favorite apologetic for atheism as well. Just to point that out. Okay, moving on. Over to you, Xbox.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, you're fine cutting me off anytime. I mean, any of y'all are. But on the atheist side, like there's a handful of them that you hear the two problems of evil, which are the logical problem and the evidential problem of evil, divine hiddenness. Those are pretty much the really big ones that you'll hear out there. Do y'all have any thoughts of any of those?
Those are two of my reasons for atheism, both the evidential and logical problem of evil, as well as divine hiddenness. And that's like the first argument a little kid will present their parents, right? It's like, mommy and daddy, if God is real, why doesn't he just show himself? And I think that is a very good question. If God is more powerful, more capable than humans, then he should be able to do, a very simple thing and show himself to us. If he wanted a relationship with us, then he would introduce himself to me. He shouldn't need humans to do a job that he can do much better. So I think divine hiddenness is a good argument against theism. And what was I going to say in regards to that? If it was the case that God wanted us to know him, there wouldn't be all this arguing. I guess you could kind of give it a new category. You can say like the argument from confusion, or from religious diversity. If there was a God, there wouldn't be all these different views about God. There's no argument in the world that 1 + 1 = 2, or certain scientific facts and so forth. It doesn't matter what culture you are, what race you are. what area of the world you are. Knowing, there's no great debates over mathematical truths or well-established scientific truths, but that's not the case for religion, right? Even within religions, there's different denominations, and even within denominations, people are arguing with each other over, what the nature of God is, or what God wants us to do, or certain theological positions and so forth. So it shouldn't be that way. Yeah, I wouldn't think it would be that way if there was an actual God who wanted to reveal things to us. Now, of course, what apologists will do is they'll just take their specific God, and when you bring up problems, we'll just start stripping off attributes. It's like, oh, well, perhaps he's not all powerful. Oh, perhaps he's not all knowing. Oh, perhaps he's not all good. And you start just stripping attributes off until you're just left with just a disembodied mind. Right. And that's what some apologists will argue to the atheists. You atheists, prove to me that a disembodied mind didn't create the universe. Can you prove that to me? And if you can't prove that to me, then your atheism is irrational. That's sometimes you'll hear that argument from people like Darth Dawkins and so forth. And it's just it's not all powerful. We're not going to talk about the attributes of this disembodied mind. The only thing we have is a disembodied mind. So prove to me a disembodied mind didn't create the universe. What can you do with that?
Yeah, I really like the problem of evil. I like the problem of evil both as an argument against God, or belief in a certain type of God, if we're being specific and careful with our language here. But I also, on the same hand, I also really like the answers to the problem of evil. Not that I'm in any way, shape, or form a theist of any variety, but I think that atheists have to admit, at least in terms of classic history of philosophy, there's been some pretty good answers, even if we can raise some objections to those answers. So I'm thinking of the free will defense is the classic, right? But one of my one of my favorite examples would be like John Hick's soul-making theodicy as a response to the problem of evil. I really like the problem of evil as an argument against the existence of God, just because it's so like intuitive, at least the evidential problem of evil. Like, it really doesn't take a whole lot to convince somebody that there's pain and suffering in the world. Right? Most people know that there is. So it has like this kind of intuitive appeal that even people that aren't like super versed in philosophy can kind of immediately be like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. I don't know. I want to give the theist a fair shake. I don't know if we have any theists here. I don't think we do, but
no, you're right on. And being specific is a good thing to point out with that, because that argument plays the problem of evil on a specific type of God, and it's usually the Christian version touted. But there are people that don't view God in those terms that will fall, and the argument can't be used against that, or at least the argument would need to be tweaked or something like that. Right. So I don't think it's a bad argument. I think it's a viable argument.
To build off of what you're saying there, I don't want to call you Xbox. I'm not sure. I can't remember.
You can call me Nick too, since the other Nick left.
Okay.
Yeah.
To build off what you're saying, Nick, not all, even within Christianity, not all Christians would accept like the trifecta that God is all good, all powerful, and all knowing. Some would even want to walk that back a little bit, or at least say that those are like theological constructs that may not necessarily capture like who or what God exactly is, and in that way kind of escape the logical grasp of the problem of evil. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome.
Welcome, Jeff. Thank you
Welcome.
very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
I would just say, well, let's ask you, Jeff, what's your favourite apologetic, however you wish to interpret that question?
I really like the presuppositional apologetic. That's my favorite one.
And why would that be?
Because it begs the question right from the jump. And I think that's a bold move. You know, it just automatically just assumes that God has to be the conclusion right from the jump. And I think in a way, presup, I think, is like kind of a balm for people that in Christian circles have exercised themselves in different areas where they're trying to like fight in, you know, pure rationalism, pure empiricism, pure, you know, whatever. The idea of just sort of assuming the truth of God from the jump as a necessary conclusion, and anyone that denies it is just being automatically wrong, is sort of beautiful, malevolent, and I think completely wrong-headed, but also kind of amazing. But yeah, it's my favorite apologetic.
Okay, thank you. And just pass it over to Hillary's. Are you there, Hillary's?
Yeah, I'm here.
And
I really
what's
don't have one. I mean, there's various ones that are okay, but I really don't have one.
right? You mean there's not one for Christianity per se, or whatever religion?
Well, I mean, we could do like look at the trees, but that can be used either direction.
Yeah, no,
All-
that's
all
fair.
some of
That's
them.
fair. If you were to put the question the other way, what's your best argument against, say, local theism of some sort, say Christianity in this case? Do you have a favourite argument against Christianity?
Just that it's incoherent. That if you take the claims that are made, they don't make sense. They don't add up. And even the Gospels, we've got 3 different versions, 3 different times a day, at least 2 different days of the week. And then the resurrection, you know, different people were there. They saw different things. So we wouldn't expect that.
Okay. You mentioned days of the week there. Big shout out to Mr. Delicious.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're going past days of the week. Another ridiculous argument, but there we are. Okay, I'm just going to throw it back to Floyd quickly. What you were saying about it, God of the gaps. What's your opinion of arguments in general for the theist side? Do you think they are all God of the gaps, or do you think some aren't?
Well, I mean, religion can account for anything, right? A religion offers explanations for, for everything. I mean, that's kind of like the purpose of religion. Our religion will tell you where we came from, where we're going, the origins of the universe, our nature, everything, all by fiat. So, I mean, that's what a religion can do. So, and that's what kind of like the precept argument is, presuppers will claim their religion can account for everything. It has an explanation for everything. But of course, you can't verify all that. It's just, all they're saying is, this is what my religion says about X. Right. So, and they think this having an explanation is superior than having no explanation.
That's the best part.
So, and I think that's why religion is attractive. It gives you all the answers. But it just seems like the God of the gaps just keeps on shrinking. The more and more we learn. There's never been a case where a supernatural explanation has superseded a natural explanation. It's always been the other way around, where a natural explanation has replaced a supernatural explanation. One example is lightning, for example. You think, oh, lightning comes from the gods or comes from God. Now we know where lightning comes from, and because we're learning more and more about the natural world, a lot of gaps has retreated to philosophical issues at this point. That's where like precept comes in. Precept is kind of like the god of the philosophical gaps. How do you account for induction? How do you account for the laws of logic and mathematics and things like that? So all those things are abstract. So the god of the gaps used to account for physical things, and now it's trying to account for abstract things. So
that was always my favorite part of these early discussions, is like people, especially Christians, like freaking out, like, ask Floyd how he accounts for, because Floyd was usually the one like poking into this presuppositional apologetic. How does he account for Christmas lights, or whatever random ass thing that they were going to talk about? But,
see, I feel the same way about God of the Gaps that how Jefferson explained how he feels about precepts. Mostly because of my academic background, looking at the history of science. But like, on the one hand, to give credit to God of the Gap style arguments, like it could theoretically be the case that there actually is a gap. And so on the one hand, I want to like respect the people that actually like dig down into it and argue that such a gap exists. I'm thinking there's a lot of classic examples, right?
Yep.
William Paley being one, but more recently, like Michael Behe, Darwin's Black Box. Like it could be the case that these gaps actually exist. And what I like about these arguments is that they tend to like play by the established rules. And it's not some like esoteric like commentary on the nature of like philosophical discourse. It's like, no, here is the process that we're talking about. Like, go look at it under a telescope. Like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, it's concrete, it's tangible that they can point back to. I don't think, like Floyd, like you were saying, they have an awful track record, historically speaking. But I still really like them. Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead,
I
Nick.
was just going to make a mention on the gaps arguments is they can be used by other religions in the same manner, that have some kind of creator god that's or even not. I'm guessing. I don't think it'd be any logical problem there. But those I lost my train of thought. I was pretty much just going to say that these can be used by other religions, and I don't know how much I see that because I don't hang around in some of these other religious rooms with the religious people besides Christians. But
No difference. I can tell you that right now. There's no difference. Okay. So
thanks, Simos.
that's okay. That's okay. Jeff, did you want to say something about the gaps?
Like
Or
a
not?
God of the Gaps kind of argument.
Yeah, if you just had any thoughts on it, or you can just leave it, and I have something else to address.
No, I mean nothing really thought other than I think that there's two different ways of looking at it. There's the God of the Gaps argument in terms of like kind of inserting God into these unanswered questions about the universe and stuff. But also I think for like religious people, there's a God of the Gaps in terms of like the answers about like what they need to do in terms of their lives. And a lot of times that stuff is, I don't think that a lot of Christians actually spend a lot of time talking about this, but depending on the denomination, there's a big gap in terms of like how they're meant to kind of conduct themselves on a day-to-day basis, or at least even on a weekly basis. So they end up creating these sort of separate, moral codes. And that's a significant issue, because the more precise they make those moral codes, the more they kind of open themselves up to criticism. So I think in a way, this is kind of different from a God of the Gaps kind of thing, but it's a kind of God of the Gaps in terms of like God doesn't really explain these differences in terms of morality. A lot of those religions, I think that's one of the ways where weaknesses persist, and that's one of the ways I think where, like, especially young people start to realize that this isn't consistent, and there's problems.
Okay. And Hillary's, anything for you? No. Okay. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, go ahead.
No, I didn't hear what you said.
Okay, that's okay. Don't worry. Okay, so I did a quick straw poll today, and I went into a room with some Christians. They shall remain nameless. Floyd knows at least 2 of them. In fact, everybody in this panel knows at least 2 of them. But I am going to remain nameless. So I said to them, "What is your favourite apologetic to use?" And the first thing they said was, "What apologetic? What do you mean by apologetic?" So this is the level we're talking at. We're not talking intellectually that high, right? I did mention 1 Peter 3:15, but that seemed to go over their heads as well. So
good.
never mind. Anyway, the first one was the absurdity of atheism. I asked him whether he actually was referring to naturalism, but that went over his head as well. So there we go. And I did say to them, I'm not getting into any theological discussions here. I just want the names of the arguments. The second one was someone who I will mention, Veckel, said presup. How long has Veckel been a presupper? God, he is desperate these days, isn't he? And the third one said revelation. So when I pointed out to... Go ahead, Xbox.
I was going to bring that up. Finish what you're saying. I'll bring it up.
No, that's it. Perfect time for you to jump in.
That came up today because I've been asking all week, not even knowing the topic of the show. I've been asking Christians and atheists about their, what's the best argument that they think is for or against, and I got wildly different answers from everybody. But the argument from personal experience came up, which you pretty much just mentioned.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, the Holy Ghost. He actually said revelation of the Holy Ghost.
That's right. And I take that to be an actual, personally, as a good argument for oneself, but not one that can be tested or spread to others.
Yeah, it's not really an apologetic then, is it? That was my point to him.
Yeah. Right.
And then he said, well, what do you mean by apologetic? I said, 1 Peter 3:15. Whatever that says. Something like you should be ready to have a defense for your faith.
Yeah.
Can't remember exactly word for word, but...
Be prepared to have a defense for your faith, yada, yada, yada. Yep.
Yeah. So saying faith is not really good enough as a defense for your faith. I'm just pointing that out. But
and the other one is that, and
I have one, but I won't use
the same. Oh, good.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm just being mouthy. Go ahead, please.
on that same note as the other one, that was another argument that came up with, argument from Scripture. As that being the quote unquote revelation, and that falls as not, I don't think, as an apologetic either. You're arguing me almost as a precept would argue, right? Like you're already concluding that this book is true.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when I'm trying to argue it to you, yeah. Not the person receiving the argument, but the person giving the argument has already concluded that it's true, and is arguing from it. I guess was my point.
Exactly. Yeah. Like Judeo-Christian, it becomes just an assertion again.
Yeah.
And then you're back to square one saying, yeah, but that's your claim. Can you now demonstrate your claim or prove your claim? And they'll go, no, the claim is the proof. And is a claim evidence? Well, maybe, but certainly not in any real sense to get you past the point of conclusion, and certainly not to get you to the point of conclusion. You're shaking your head there, Michael. Claims aren't evidence, no? But I take it that's your position.
I don't think. I mean, maybe they could give me some great examples, but generally speaking, evidence is what supports claims.
Interesting point you're making there. I only say that because I did have a massive, well, myself and Serb actually, no, mainly Serb, had a massive argument with somebody about whether claims are evidence. And so if I were to say to you, well, actually, there's 2.2 billion Christians on the planet, that's got to be some kind of evidence, or that increases the likelihood of the existence of God. What fallacy would you say I'm using there?
That popular one?
Genetic fallacy.
Well, I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know that. Well, it depends on where
Or
you're coming
naturalistic
from. I don't
fallacy.
know that it would be a fallacy initially.
Yeah, if you're just saying that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're not making
No.
an actual argument.
That's your argument for why it's true, or why your claim is more likely true. Let's just go down that road.
You're just trying to make the argument like, oh, there's this many people, and therefore it's true.
Well, therefore it's more likely true. I mean, saying it is true is a bit strong, but I mean, evidence surely is just something which increases the chance of the probability, or increases the chance of the proposition being true.
I don't know. I don't know if that's actually fallacious. It would just end up being in the category of like being kind of binary, right? It's either right or wrong. Like you could kind of come out and say like, hey, there's this number of people, and I'm venturing forward and doing this based on like the number of people that exist. Therefore, here I am. If you're wrong about that, it's not a huge issue. It's sort of like, you're just kind of you're attempting to establish a fact, and the fact is wrong. I don't know that that's fallacious, though.
It's
just incorrect.
We're crossing into territories here where you get to the fallacy of the appeal to authority, right? And if you can't appeal to the 2.2 billion, then I guess like you could point to theologians and say, well, theologians are experts in their field, and therefore 100% of theologians think God exists, or 98% of theologians think God exists, therefore God exists. Are we making shit up there, or?
Well, I think that's actually the problem, because a lot of things that happen, like it's sort of like the problem where people think that, like appealing to what's the common one? There's appealing to authority, and then there's the other one that's appeal. They're not necessarily a problem. Because, like, for instance, if you're appealing to an expert in your particular field, in the field of the argument that you're talking about, that's not an appeal to authority. You're actually appealing to somebody that actually has some kind of say in the argument that you're talking about. And I think in terms of like kind of...
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
That was to say that's actually, it is still an appeal to authority. It's just not it's not fallacious.
Right. It's appealing to an authority, at least in terms of like that particular field, but it's not an appeal to authority in terms of fallacy. Because you're not trying to say like, well, Oprah told me that there's only 3 billion people on the planet, right? Like Oprah has nothing to do with it. Right. But if you're talking to somebody who's actually like an expert in counting the number of people on the planet, you can cite that person, and you're not really guilty of, appealing to, you're not guilty of perpetrating that particular fallacy because you're citing an expert in that particular field. So,
yeah, I would agree with you, Jefferson. It depends entirely on how they're using it. If we're going to go with Simos, is that they're using it as an argument for the validity of, let's say that they're saying there are X amount of Christians on the earth, whatever millions we're going to go with, and that as a result, you ought to be Christian because of how many Christians there are. I mean, that's the fallacy would be like the classic bandwagon fallacy that because this many people believe it, it increases the likelihood of that belief being true. But
exactly.
That's fair enough. So I just want to push one thing further with you, Michael, if I may, which is to say, look, you can take that then and say, hey, look, the theologians are experts in their field. I think we'd all agree that theologians are in fact experts in the field, and so I can appeal to just the experts in the field. Right? There seems to be something fallacious there, because, and I'll tell you, I'll briefly say why I think it is still fallacious. Mainly because there's no empirical evidence in their field, right? Or very little, anyway, shall we say. The empirical evidence certainly doesn't point to a supernatural conclusion, if there is some.
I would.
Hang on a minute.
Sorry.
Let me just get through this. So, but that's also true in some other fields as well, like philosophy, for instance. And so, can we say, if we're saying that we can't appeal to theologians, then maybe we shouldn't be appealing to philosophical experts for philosophical positions, which doesn't sound unreasonable to me, to be honest. But there we go. Or at least the truth of the conclusions that they come to. Sure enough, we could appeal to them for talking about like whether things are possibly true, but not necessarily true.
Jefferson, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I think that what he's bringing up is actually, I think I kind of lost my track though. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, even with, there's proper appeal to authorities and improper appeal to authorities, and so we have to, even with that, even like general sort of reasoning, you have to be like super careful, because like, yes, theologians are experts in theology, of course, as the name suggests, but most theologians don't deal with arguments for the existence of God, for example. And just to use an example, I would say that William Lane Craig is probably the foremost expert in the Kalam cosmological argument. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Kalam cosmological argument is true, because again, we can draw a distinction between justification and truth, that these things don't necessarily tell one another. In the same way that a physicist who's an expert in string theory, just because there's a lot, I mean, we're dealing with two very different things. Maybe it's a bad analogy, but that doesn't necessarily mean just because there's a department where they all talk about string theory, that string theory somehow like legitimate, or it is legitimate, but more legitimate or true in the same way that relativity is true, right? So yeah, we would just have to be really careful with, I would ask that person a few questions, Simos. I don't know.
Well, for that authority, I mean, ghost hunters are definitely an authority on whether ghosts are true, I guess, or whether they exist. And the same thing for voodoo priests. Surely we could trust them about whether voodoo is effective. And I'm saying that a little with sarcasm.
Yeah, I think same point. I think it's a fair point. Just because you have somebody that might, like, I've studied all sort of like history of pseudoscientific stuff, and sorry, my dog doesn't like me talking about pseudoscience apparently. And just because somebody might be an expert on astrology doesn't add legitimacy to astrology. Likewise, the amount of people who believe it also doesn't add legitimacy to whether or not it's actually true, or whether or not it actually corresponds to reality.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at about the separate standard. The standard that we usually appeal to is not the authority themselves; it's the work that the authority has done, right? And I think that's the kind of fallacy which gets stood on when you just say, "Oh, Dave from the pub told me X," right? Well, if Dave from the pub is an experimental physicist who is doing work and is telling you about subatomic particles, Dave may have a good point. If Dave from the pub is just a cleaner from, or a plumber, then maybe just because he knows about tubes doesn't mean he knows about CERN. So I think that's the thing. And if that's the case, then of course what we're saying is that, as like I was indicating, well, theology, there's no possible way to get empirical evidence for the supernatural that we know at the moment, and you'd have to demonstrate that if you did. And who's an expert on the supernatural? I'm not even sure there is such a thing, right? When it comes to empirical evidence. But then, am I just begging the question? or at least against supernaturalism, I guess would be.
I think some Christians would argue with you about being experts.
Well, I'm saying the same thing for philosophy. I'm saying that,
No, I
I'm
agree.
saying that, Russell is not an expert on, the synthetic, whatever it is, distinction, whatever that one is, synthetic analytic distinction.
Analytic, yeah.
Analytic.
Yeah.
Simos,
Go ahead.
you really have to give it to Dave the plumber down at the pub.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
really knows shit.
Yeah, he knows shit. I
Oh.
would say that much.
Okay.
But I mean,
But
again,
you better listen to him when he starts talking about things.
Is this
Stop.
everybody? Oh. Yeah,
Well,
maybe.
I'm not sure what the name of the apologetic is, but the one that they pull, oh, well, it's true. You're just suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. So, I mean, it's heads I win, tails you lose either way. Supposedly, that's supporting their argument.
Right.
Yeah, preceptors will use that. The argument from Scripture that I was mentioning, it's not really an argument, but just quoting Scripture at you, we'll do it. I'm not sure there's just a formal argument for that, but it's one you hear plenty. Like, and I'm thinking I first heard the verse when the preceptors started showing up around Seitan, Bruggencate, and all that.
The only thing that would, I don't want to go back to what you were saying, Simos, if you wanted to move on, but the only thing that makes me a little bit cautious about it is that, I mean, and maybe I'm thinking more so along the lines of religious studies rather than theology. I would draw a little bit of a distinction there, but even with theology, I mean, I still think we have to recognize it as a academic discipline, even if there may not be, let's say, empirical support for a lot of what they're talking about. I still think that we could recognize that there is scholarly consensus regarding certain topics. I'm having a hard time figuring. I'm thinking more like historically, like theologians who study Thomas Aquinas might be in agreement about how to interpret like a particular passage. And I think the amount of scholarship that goes into that is equivalent to what like historians do or any other sort of like related discipline. So it ought to be like acknowledged and recognized as such. I don't know if that made sense.
Well, it sounds like you're just trying to put an apologetic for philosophy being a real discipline.
I mean, I do have a horse in that race. So.
Yeah. I don't know. What Floyd, you've had countless debates with many different types of apologetics. Is there anything in there like? Can you tell the difference between Dave, my mate down the pub, who happens to be, I don't know, a Baptist, and say someone like R.C. Sproul or whomever,
R.C. Sproul is a Reformed Presbyterian Calvinist, and even within Reform camps, there's debates over what apologetics they should use. In fact, R.C. Sproul actually had a debate with Greg Bonson, where R.C. Sproul pretty much does a great job at dismantling presuppositional apologetics. The debate's available on YouTube. People should watch that. R.C. Sproul used what he calls, I guess, classical apologetics and so forth, where he offers his reasons, his evidence, and so forth. And this kind of goes back to the argument from confusion. I mean, here you have R.C. Sproul and Greg Bonson, who are in the same camp, so to speak, debating each other, of how to defend the faith against the reprobate, which is strange. The Bible says that Christians will have the mind of Christ and be led to all truth by the Holy Spirit. And here's an example of it not happening. So I think that alone is evidence that that Christianity is false. So
well, at least the Bible is false.
yeah,
Or has a falsity in it, I should say.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I always say when two Christians argue with each other, Satan's laughing. Because Satan's winning then, right?
Yeah, he's winning. Yeah, Satan wins.
Yeah.
But I'm both. What you usually get in that situation, of course, is someone like DD would do this at the drop of a hat. Will claim that he is the only real Christian, no true Scotsman fallacy. Comes in, and you hear it all the time. Again, when you go to a Christian channel, eventually it comes out as, well, you're not a real Christian. I'm just reminded of a time that G-Man was arguing with a woman, a girl, that was quoting him scripture back, saying why he was wrong. And his response was, you do realize you're a woman, right? Oh, fucking brilliant.
The audacity of him.
Yeah, audacity. Thank you. Yeah. Big shout out to Drag if you're out there.
But
Sorry,
actually,
You know why he used that as an argument, right? Women aren't supposed to be teaching, and they're supposed to keep silent.
Yeah.
yeah, see, over on Clubhouse, that came up this week. And the defense for it was, I don't know if you were in the room, Floyd, but the defense was something along the lines of, it's okay for them to preach. It's just the man should be the one that bears that burden. And if he's not able to, then the woman can. And I'm not a Christian, so I don't know how to make the sense out of the nonsense.
I just want to read this out, because actually this is quite salient. I think it's a way too late to stop them from recruiting more people into their nonsense, and it's probably mostly been reduced to trying to save handfuls of people from the Holocaust they're about to perpetuate. I think actually that this is the best reason why we shouldn't be arguing against Christianity. If there is anything which is an apologetic for Christianity, this is it. And it potentially stops people, perpetuating very violent crimes against other people in some way. And if it does that, of course, then who are we to take their favorite toy away from them, as Hitchens once said.
Yeah. Well, you hear some Christians say, if you don't hold the exact theology I hold, then you're not a Christian. That you're damned to hell. Things like Trinitarianism, for example. I see that a lot. If you're not a Trinitarian Christian, then you're hellbound. And I always find that laughable. People are saved by having the correct theological position. That's what saves you. It's not enough to just believe in Jesus and what he did for you on the cross. That's not good enough. You actually have to be a Trinitarian and hold to all these other beliefs to be a Christian as well. Which, I find that funny, because if you ask the majority of Christians to explain the Trinity to you, they're going to get it wrong. They're going to describe some sort of modalism, or might not even have any idea what Trinitarian is at all. So it's pretty funny that you think being a Trinitarian is required, to get to heaven. Yet most Christians don't know what that is. And of course, the people who know about Trinitarianism they'll say, "Oh yeah, those aren't real Christians," because they're not serious Christians. So now you're at a point where, unless you're really devoted to studying theology, you're not a Christian. Most people don't have time to study for this stuff, right? They're busy, with their jobs, making ends meet, paying their bills, and so forth. And these diehard, new Christians, and typically they're young males, like in their early 20s, that have this sort of attitude. Where they spend a lot of time studying and reading the Bible and, in debates and so forth. And they're saying, if you're not a dedicated person like me, then you're not a real Christian.
Floyd, you just described 50% of the internet.
Yeah, probably. But most
about all sorts of things, not just Christianity.
know.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of Christians that they go to church on Sunday and so forth, and really don't read the Bible or study that much. They kind of view church and their pastor like they would a doctor, right? Most people aren't expert at medicine. You go to your doctor, and your doctor is the expert, and he prescribes medicine to you or tells you, okay, you're going to need an operation, or no, just take some Tylenol and you'll get over it and stuff like that. They lean on their pastor to guide them, to let them know what to do. And as far as all that theological stuff, talk to my pastor. Yeah, he'll educate you, but I'll just I'll just defer to him. I'm not going to spend time reading hundreds and hundreds of books to try to explain this stuff. I'll just go to my pastor, and if I have any problems about it, and and that's that.
Yeah, I tried that once when somebody suggested that I should do that because they didn't know in real life this is. So I went, well, yeah, all right then. So we went to the church, found the guy, and he sat down and said exactly the same thing that the guy in the congregation said. There was no difference, same position and everything. And I was like, okay, right, well, what's the point in going to the pastor if he's just going to repeat the same old mythos, right? But anyway, what can you do? What can you do? Church of England, that's all I'm saying. Yeah, Xbox, is there anything you wanted to add in? Just out of on the off chance?
No, I was trying to think of some more of the arguments that I hear, and because that's why I was asking this week, was I wanted to genuinely, I don't care what converted them, I wanted to know, or deconverted them, I wanted to know what, the best arguments they thought hearing after the fact, kind of thing. And
Yeah, I
think
mean,
most of them have come up.
Yeah, I think we're getting through them all right. I would just say this: look, how many of these arguments? Because, like I was saying about God of the Gaps, virtually, as far as I can tell, all of them end up in the God of the Gaps. But that's because perhaps I'm an empiricist, and therefore, again, I may be begging the question. Don't know. But I don't think I'm saying, and this is the key point as far as I'm concerned, which I'd like you guys to address here, which is by me saying it's not true, am I saying that it is false? And this is the dilemma, and I think what they do is reverse that. In general, what they're trying to do half the time is reverse it and shift the burden to say, well, why do you as an atheist think it's false? Right? So I know we're treading dangerously close to a definitional war on atheism, but nonetheless, I think, Michael, I'd like you just to address where's the fallacy in this, and where should we be careful about what we're claiming?
Yeah, just recap that for me real quick. I'm sorry.
Okay, so quite often they will try to reverse the position and shift the burden, and they say, well, no, look, I'm not proving that it's true because I just believe it to be true. However, you as an atheist have an argument. DD says this, for instance. What is your argument that makes God false?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things wrong here. I mean, first, you really can't argue for a negative. Like it's you hear this all the time when people talk about like burden of proof. If you're the one making the positive affirmation about reality, whatever it is, that God exists or that Bigfoot exists or that UFOs exist or whatever it is, like if you're the one making the claim, then it's up to you to provide the evidence to demonstrate and to prove that claim. Like that's just how that works, right? It's not up for me. It's not up to me to disprove it, right? So that's the first. That's the first issue. Like, unless you're just like recounting your personal experience, unless you're not making an argument, right? If you're just saying like, oh, I had X, Y, and Z experience, and that is why I personally believe X, Y, or Z. But if we're like engaged in a critical conversation where you're like trying to convince me or I'm trying to convince you, then you have to provide me some evidence. That being said, I do think that this is one of the big weak, I don't know if I want to call it a weak area or deficit. But if you're going to, it's not an, I don't think that atheists have to argue that God does not exist because of the reasons why I just said. But I do think that atheists should at the very least put forth some sort of positive explanation for whether we're talking about the probability of God, such as like arguments like the argument from divine hiddenness, for example, that supports the position of atheism itself, or that lends credence to the, I would rather defend like naturalism, right? That lends credence to the idea of naturalism. So one of the arguments that I give is kind of an argument from the history of science of the gradual disappearance of supernatural explanations. Now, that's not an argument against God per se. It's an argument against a specific sort of general worldview. So that's where I would start off with that. I don't know.
Okay. Anybody else want to dive in there on that particular shifting the burden in general, or ways to avoid having the burden shifted?
Well, I mean, whoever makes an assertion, whoever makes a proposition, whether it be positive or negative, has the burden to support that proposition. If someone says, "Oh, I believe God exists," and they offer an argument, it's a bad argument, and you show them why. Okay, you didn't show that God doesn't exist. That would be the fallacy, like we talked about a few shows back. Just because you have a bad argument doesn't mean the conclusion's wrong. It just means it's just that's just a poor argument that supports the conclusion. But you would, the critic of that position has to leave it at that, saying, okay, well, you made an assertion, you offered an argument, that argument didn't convince me, and in fact I might even be able to show that's fallacious, but that's as far as it goes. You just offered a bad argument. You can't say therefore your assertion's false. You just didn't convince me. Yeah, but when atheists, if atheist says, I don't believe God exists, okay, you just made an assertion there. You made a proposition, and you needed to offer an argument for that position as well. So you bear a certain amount of burden.
Right. Did you mean to say I believe gods don't exist, or did you mean to say I don't believe gods exist?
Well, if you say if I don't believe gods exist, I think all gods are BS. I think they're all fiction. You bear a burden to justify that assertion. So,
Okay, but what I'm getting at is, one seems to me, if I say I don't believe something, then I'm just telling you what my state of mind is, right? And to demonstrate what my state of mind is fairly trivial. One would assume, right? So it almost doesn't matter. Well, because like if I say, I don't believe atheism is true, right? For instance, then all they've got to say is, well, I don't believe it because I believe God exists, and that's enough to demonstrate that the proof that atheism is not true, right? So it seems we could do the same trick, and we could just parallel that argument and say, well, if you want me to demonstrate that I don't believe theism is true, all I've got to say is I don't believe theism is true. And you've virtually done the work right there.
Yeah.
Again, it seems to me when we're talking about propositions, we've got to have the proposition be specific about the subject. Otherwise, we're just going to be I don't know what the word is, sidestepping the question. In some sense, doing exactly what they do, which is shift the burden, and that seems to me quite a difficult thing to deal with. And that's what I'm trying to get at the heart of this. How, as debaters, when somebody does that, and like I can't think of many times that they don't at some point. When I went in and asked them for their list of apologetics, that all three of their things were basically shifting the burden. Absurdity of atheism is a good argument for God. No, even if all arguments for atheism fail, still doesn't mean there's a God.
Right.
Exactly what Quine said. Is it Quine said it the other way around, or someone said the other way around? If all arguments for God fail, still doesn't mean God is false.
Correct.
Right. So again, we're talking about the same fallacy. I don't know the name of it offhand. So that's what I'm trying to get to you, Floyd, because you've been adept, I would say, one of the people that is adept at trying to nail Jesus to the cross. Sorry, nail the argument to stay on point. Maybe I said that incorrectly.
Yeah, well, yeah, again, that's a fallacy. The fallacy is if you find a fallacy in an argument, that doesn't mean that the conclusion is false. So yeah, if you come across every argument for God that's fallacious, that doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. That just means that your arguments are bad, for that conclusion. And they would say, okay, well, yeah, that could be the case, but you didn't prove God doesn't exist, right? God could still exist, it's possible, and I'm willing to grant that unless there's something contradictory, with the God you're describing, then it is logically possible. And what does logically possible mean? Well, logically possible simply means that there's no contradiction in it, right? But again, if you start looking at specific gods, that's when the contradictions start coming into place, and those gods can be refuted. When I considered all the gods presented to myself, I find problems with them all. So inductively, I provisionally reject all the gods. That's my reason for atheism. I haven't proved that I didn't offer an argument that some disembodied mind didn't create the universe, right? Like I talked about earlier. I don't have a deductive argument to show that a disembodied mind didn't create the universe. I openly admit that I don't have a deductive argument to prove that a mind does. But all the gods presented to me, I have a problem with. So I just provisionally reject them all until further evidence or reasons come along for me to accept them. So
Absolutely.
So again, I think my view of atheism is a rational one. Is warranted, even though I can't rationally prove that every concept of God, has been disproved. There's something like Darth Dawkins would asserts that we have to have to be a rational atheist. I don't think that's reasonable at all.
Well, he sort of conflates a requirement for a deductive argument with sort of just a justification in general. So I think that I would lean towards every single mind that we've ever seen is requiring of some sort of physical brain associated with it. Whether you want to call a computer a mind, it still requires some sort of physical system in order to facilitate it. That I wouldn't say that necessarily it would have to have a physical system. It's just, as you say, provisionally, you would say, well, my understanding of how a mind works means that it does need a physical system in order to incorporate it. So in order to convince me there is a mind without this physical system, maybe show me a mind without a physical system like a brain first. And then, I could at least say, hey, I'd be agnostic about it then. I don't know whether there is another mind out there without a physical structure to incorporate it. But it seems to be the case that is required. So as you say, and people have accused me of black swan for that, but I'm not saying it's necessarily the case that a mind without a brain can't exist. But I think provisionally I would lean towards that. And the other one is sort of, well, that doesn't exclude a God. And I don't think in order to be an atheist, you have to logically exclude a God. I think you just need to believe there is no God.
Okay, so let me just address that second, which is something I've been quite keen to try and get an answer, maybe from Michael especially, but others as well. Right, which is to say that, look, if the proposition God does not exist is either true or false, it seems to me then that if the definition of God becomes unfalsifiable, then there is no way to prove it false. Right? Therefore, it can't be a logical proposition. Therefore,
what do you mean by prove?
Well, there can't be a proof that God is false, deductively.
I don't think there can be a proof of much, to be honest with you. I kind of lean on this. Anyway, sorry, this was for Michael. I'm so sorry, Michael. Go for it, mate. I'm just jumping in.
Well, my point being here is that when we say that the definition of atheism has this leeway where we get into, I don't have a deductive proof to say all gods are necessarily false. Well, you wouldn't expect there to be one if you can give a definition of God which is in principle unfalsifiable, would you? I mean, I don't think that's logical to expect somebody to take something unfalsifiable and then prove it to be false, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure how to put this, but there's an issue with trying to prove ontological points deductively. And this is the issue. Like, you can't make deductive arguments about ontology. Or you can, but you just can't demonstrate it. If we're talking about existence, right? This is why deductive reasoning fell out of favor in a lot of the sciences, is because once you get a science like biology, what good does deduction do? I'm talking about animals, right? Observation takes the place of deduction.
Yeah.
Now, it might be a little bit different with God in the classic theistic sense, because we're probably, I mean, this gets so confusing because some theists would even say that God exceeds the category of being. I'm going to confuse myself. So I would say there, Simos, to your point specifically, that, yeah, we're because of your empiricist leanings, I think that deductive arguments are probably the wrong way to go there. And I think some theists might agree with you there. I don't know.
Well, I mean, my point really here is that it's a shell game that they're playing here. And, they're saying, oh, look, under my cup, right, I've got a falsifiable God. But I want you to show me what's under the other cups I've got, which is an unfalsifiable God. Right? And tell me that that's false. Why is that false? Right? And I'm like, well, I'm not sure that that's even possible. I can give you a reason why I don't believe it to be true, but I can't give you a reason as to why it is false. Right? And then they go, well, then you're just an agnostic.
Sorry, I'm confused. Why do we have to do that? Like, what other... And I think Michael was absolutely spot on. Like, in all other disciplines in which we claim, we sort of believe or claim knowledge or have these sort of... we make statements about, like biology and nuclear physics and all this stuff. We don't usually go for deductive arguments and sort of in some way proving an ontology, I think a mistake that's made, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't really have access to ontology. Everything's going to be epistemology. Everything's going to be our justification for why we believe or know something. So I don't know why we would have to disprove a God in order to have the belief that that God does not exist based upon reasonable inference. I don't know why that's the case.
Yeah, it sounds like we're using two different like frameworks, or in that situation, Simos, kind of to build off of what Mark was saying. It seems like they're requiring that you use a particular framework that we're not going to use. So like to build off what Mark was saying, like you don't do that. If I don't believe that Bigfoot exists, I don't have to go about like demonstrating that. I don't have to go about proving, especially deductively. Like that's just kind of silly, right? And I think we're dealing with the same species of arguments, to stick with the biological analogy. I'm talking to stick with the biological analogy there. So yeah, it sounds really confusing, and I'm not quite sure like where I would go with that. But yeah,
right.
Well,
But
I think
we've all heard them say that, though. That's my point. It's not that they're necessarily right to say that. Let's not confuse the argument I'm making here, right? I agree with you, obviously. It's nonsensical as saying that we can prove atheism to be true, that they can prove Christianity to be true, because you can always ad hoc give an explanation ad hoc as to why any particular argument against Christianity doesn't work. You just change the definition, and that was my point. You can change the definition to make it unfalsifiable, and if you do, I can't prove it false.
So I've got problems with that. Even something like even and as Michael said, like Bigfoot's a perfect example. Like you can't really sort of apply a logical thing to something unfalsifiable like Bigfoot. But even when you're talking about like what's the color of the sky, it's blue. You're not making a deductive argument for that kind of thing. You're just observing and making inference. Atheism is true is a weird statement to me, because atheism is a position of belief, or sort of. I don't know why you would.
Sorry, I have to interrupt you, Mark. There, the presupposition here is that we're going with the strong version of atheism, that you believe the gods are false.
Yes, it is true that I believe that gods are false, but that's not a true statement about ontology, right?
Okay,
it's not saying.
We're saying that God doesn't exist. We're not saying that you just believe it to be. You have a reason why you believe it to be false.
It's just a slight change of how, like, because as an atheist, I don't see atheism as being a true or false kind of statement. Like, I get what you're saying, but
we're assuming
it's a belief.
It is, though, here for this particular argument.
Okay, all right. And I think that theists get along this line because they are using sort of some of them. I suppose I should speak clearer there. That some theists think that they have access to some kind of ontology. They can bypass any kind of like they have automatic truth that they have access to without sort of but real in fact all they really have access to is in an epistemological structure to justify their belief in something. So I think they're requiring us to be of the same sort of certainty they are, that they have access to this truth, and this truth they have to have it as you have to have access to this incredible truth as well. And maybe I'm misrepresenting some people's position, but that's just what I've found. And I think that's sort of what Michael may be alluding to with people talking in different frameworks, because they're so positive that a God exists. They're expecting us to be just as positive as a God does not exist. But I would hesitate to even go so far as to claim I have knowledge that a God does not exist. I would have to say I believe that a God does not exist based upon a series of things. I could possibly justify it into knowledge, but I'm kind of very hesitant to do so. I kind of think that I think my justification is provisional, and therefore I can't claim that really solid thing of knowledge. But that's not required to be an atheist, right? It's just to believe there is no gods.
Yeah, not even at the minimum, but yes, you're right. And again, I agree with all of that. I'm just putting forward the philosophical position and saying, look, if we make God a proposition, if we're talking about a proposition, it either is true or is false, and there is no leeway. Your belief in it is kind of irrelevant in this particular discussion, because that's not what philosophy is asking about particularly. And that's all I'm going down. And I'm just saying, look, in that position, there still seems to be something illogical, right? And I would say the reason that philosophy gets away with this card trick, playing the shell game, it's because they've had to, because the theists themselves have been playing this shell game. And the reason, as far as I can see by reading, something like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, is that there's this thing called classical theism, which it seems to me the philosophers are assuming is the position, at minimal position, of theists, right? And therefore, that's the position that they're arguing against. So it's not like they're saying, it turns out to me, it's not like they're saying that there is no definition of God given, therefore you have to have an argument against any possible definition of God. They're saying, no, we're going to assume the omni-gods, and therefore we can say as philosophers that 70% of us are atheists in the strong philosophical sense. Does that make sense?
I unfortunately have to head out. I'm really sorry.
No.
But thank you so much. It's good seeing all of you.
Michael, before you go, Michael.
I'm sorry, Mark. I'm sorry, Mark. I haven't seen you in so long.
Yeah, I know.
Before you go, Mark, before you go, Michael, could you just say whether that made sense to you or not?
It did. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think when in philosophy, like when I teach theism, I teach classical theism. Like that's what like basically, like we don't really talk about like all the developments that have happened over the 20th century. Like none of that's really taken into consideration. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And so there are assumptions of classical theism in which it assumes about God, specifically like different properties of God, being all powerful, all knowing, all loving, and also like God's respect to nature, like what God's relationship to the universe actually is. Sorry, I got to take my dog out. She's having a
no problem, Mike. Thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you again next time. Hopefully.
Bye, Mike.
Take care.
Go ahead, Mark. I think the shell game is apt if there is infinite shells, because the problem with that is that if we're to deductively have to eliminate a god, we have to deductively eliminate magical butterflies and fairies that create the universe and extra dimensional aliens with the capability to do the same. It is a false dichotomy to say it is either natural, so reality is naturally forming, or it is a god, because there are an infinite number of things you can postulate that are under the other shells, essentially, right? So I think
you can make it a dichotomy, though, like I was doing. You could make it a dichotomy like I was doing. It's either falsifiable or it's not falsifiable.
Well, sure, but there's an unlimited amount of things that are not falsifiable.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. So
that's my point, isn't it? That's my point. That's why it's a shell game. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a dichotomy, but the origin of the universe is not a dichotomy between, or not a true dichotomy, I should say, between nature and God. And so it really doesn't strike me as particularly useful to say, well, you've got to logically deduct God from this. As you said, a shell game, right? You've got to sort of deduct the unfalsifiable God kind of thing, because you've only deducted one thing out of an infinite set of possible origins. that if you're requiring deduction rather than unfalsifiability being discarded because there's no way to falsify it, then you're still left with an infinite amount of other possibilities. And that's before you go into simulation theory and all of that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
So, you know, it doesn't strike me as particularly useful to go down that line. I get what you're saying, though.
Well, no. It's the reason I'm saying it's useful is because it discounts it from being propositional in the philosophical sense. So there you go. If you want, like DD's saying, well, what is the proposition? You know, how do you justify the proposition God doesn't exist?
Yes.
Right. And I'm like, well, that depends on your definition of God, right? And he will scream blue murder at you that he will not defend Christianity there. He wants to defend a version of God which turns out to be unfalsifiable. And I'm saying there's a problem there. And the problem is, of course, A, it's shifting the burden of proof, and B, there is no way to do what he asks. He's literally asking a loaded question every single time he says that.
Oh, sure, yeah. And he sort of hinges your atheism on being able to logically deduct or sort of logically exclude the existence of God, and I don't think atheism hinges on that. I think that's
it can't, though, for the reason I just said. For the reason is because if we can, that means the proposition God does not exist is false. That's what he's saying that the claim of atheism is. And I'm saying it can't be false. If we can't prove it false, then it must be true. He's making like several fallacies at once, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So there you go, right? And if you say, right, well, if under one of the shells is God is unfalsifiable, then he's just asking a loaded question.
But then he'll move to, well, what provides, what absolute entity or state of being provides coherence and intelligibility for all things, etc., etc., etc. That's what he goes to.
Yeah, what undergirds it all? Pretty much.
Right. So is that an unfalsifiable proposition? If it is, we're back to the shell game. All hangs on that. That's what I'm saying is the argument. Go ahead, Xbox. Sorry.
No, you finish what you're saying.
No. I think I've made the point several times now, so I'm just repeating myself.
Oh, I'm just adding to your point.
Everybody understands. Go ahead.
I'm adding to your point. Like, you can get into like an infinite regression of gods by taking, if you take it as a dichotomy, which Mark was rightly pointed out that it's not a true dichotomy to put it as God versus naturalism.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine there's theory, like in your head, hypothetically, pick the God side, and well, which God is it going to be at that point? And could it be another one? Even could there be one that one is, created by? There's nothing stopping it, infinite regression, unless you propose the unmoved mover or the which is just
that's all perfect.
But it would just be random that you picked this one to be out of any infinite regression of gods there. It would just be arbitrary of which one you picked as the unmoved mover.
Well, I would agree with Simos. He won't discuss any specific mover. He will discuss a very generalized mover, basically a unnamed, it's Jesus. It's an unnamed, God that did everything that he won't discuss any details about, but has to be there because he demands you come up with something that is the sort of origin of all intelligibility.
Absolutely, with that. Yeah.
I don't think you have to have an origin of intelligibility for something to provide intelligibility to the universe. I don't think you need to know the origin. He seems to think you do. I don't think that you do. But having said that, my usual one I'll go to is some sort of, fundamental level of reality is what provides what is intelligible. What is true and not comes down to what reality actually ontologically is. So if I make a statement like, Simos is fantastic, obviously untrue. Yeah, that will
Agreed.
rely on Simos ontologically, but I get you, or really a better one, because that's sort of subjective, and I love Simos. Simos is tall, kind of thing, and that's still subjective. Simos has a ball in his hand. Whether that is true or not, I think, sort of so.
Yeah,
Whether
it's
that's
not true, Mark.
intelligible.
I've actually got 2 in my hand right now.
Oh, you had to. You just had to, didn't you?
I did, yes.
That's funny. Anyway, that comes down to whether in reality he does or not. But then Darth will go to. I've thought about this way too much too. Darth will go to the many and the one problem kind of thing and say that reality is a set of all things. The problem there for me is you're saying reality isn't real because sets aren't abstract concepts. They're not, in fact, concrete. So there's a problem there. But he'll also invoke the many in the one, where if you say, sort of there's something there, he'll say, well, isn't that made up of parts? Isn't the universe made up of parts? And how can something be fundamental if it has parts? And that's the many in one problem. And that applies to everything, kind of thing. So if I say, hey, I'm one thing, well, I'm made of multiple cells. How can there be multiple cells if I'm one thing? So the many and the one's sort of one of those problems like solipsism or something that no one's really ever solved as far as I know. I generally will lean towards monism, that everything is one thing, but it provides emergent properties that we designate into multiple things. And then Darth Dawkins gets really mad. Very angry.
Yeah, I mean, when you say really, I think that's a qualification which isn't needed with Darth Dawkins.
Yeah,
Floyd,
that's true.
what do you think about what we've just been speaking about? Because you've had multiple debates with the person that is the king of shifting the burden, so to speak.
Oh, and by the way, I gave him an invite.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Who?
DD.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I find it laughable when presuppositionalists will claim that the Trinity solves the problem of the one and the many. It doesn't. That's just one example. This is another example of the one and the many. It's one God and many, in this case, 3 persons. But that doesn't answer the question, which one is ultimate? Is it the unity or the diversity? It's just an example of it. And you brought up one, humans are one human, but made up of multiple parts. You say same thing about universe. The universe is united, diverse. You can say the same thing about a pile of sand. It's one pile of sand made up of multiple grains of sand. So invoking the Trinity to solve the one and the many, doesn't solve the problem. It's just another example of the problem. The question is, which one is ultimate, the one and the many? And what these presuppositions will say is, both are equally ultimate. Well, that doesn't answer the question. The question is, which one is it, the one or the many? And they're just saying, well, both are. Well, okay. Well, we can say the same thing for us and a pile of sand in the universe and so forth. It really doesn't solve the problem at all.
I don't know if the problem can even be solved. I don't even know if there is a solution to that.
Is it much of a problem? Is it really a bigger problem to begin with? I mean, it's kind of interesting, but I don't think philosophers lose sleep over this.
I can't see how it's a problem other than a definitional problem at best. In which case, okay, we'll just use a different word, and that's okay. Like you said, diverse. Diverse is one word. And and what do you say? Does that really mean anything? I'm not sure there is a distinction worth making there. The meaning of the word is different to the word itself. Okay, map and territory. Anybody?
Just Xbox, mate. Darth Dawkins isn't going to come into a room he doesn't have control over. That's never going to happen. I do appreciate your optimism. I think it's beautiful, but that's something that Darth Dawkins generally doesn't do.
He's certainly not coming into a room with Floyd ever again.
You're scaring to you, Floyd.
Floyd might be scaring
I love it. Floyd scares me a little, just a little.
Oh, hey, hello, Tog. Good to see you, mate. Jump in. There is a link up there if you want to. Of course, no problem. You can give your opinions, and we'll definitely sit and listen. That's perfectly good. In fact, it would be great to have a diverse opinion on the panel. Anyway, not that we're really about the arguments. We're about what the arguments mean. We're all meta here. They have Jill. We have Xbox. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Look, I really
prefer
Xbox. Yeah,
yeah.
I think Xbox.
I have to say thank you so much, Lucky, for the comedy in the side chat. We really appreciate you. Simos, if you saw the answer in text was baptism. Okay. Yes, good point. Thank you. That is a possible answer. I think it's begging the question, but it is a possible answer. And that's fine. I don't know. It's a best apologetic or something like that. I think he's answering the question too, and that's fine.
Is that fine. What it is? Favorite apologetics? I guess that's different than the best or most convincing sort of Christian apologetics kind of thing, I guess. So it depends on what you're after.
That's fine, Tog. Absolutely fine. Same time next week. You're always welcome.
Yeah, it's always a good time, mate. I've never met you before. I don't think. Would be good to meet you as well.
He's a good guy, Tog. Yeah.
Oh, good stuff.
Mark.
So
the
favorite is the crazier ones.
Aimed at particular religions. They can be aimed at a general God type or supernatural, or they can be aimed at atheism. So either side of the argument, just what you think is the best one. Doesn't have to be a good one, but what you think the best one run is.
Okay, so my favorite one to giggle over is definitely a guy who said that they had a physical relationship with God. That was a classic. That was like argumentum ex coitus, it was hilarious. That's one of my favorites, as well as the you're familiar with P-Town, aren't you, Simos Fung?
Yes, of course, yeah.
The moon one is kind of hilarious. The eclipse, the moon, the same size as the sun.
Yeah, fine tuning version of fine tuning. Ultimated Christian was the other one, of course. That actually was exposed on Brojo by myself and Cerberus. That particular position he has.
That I think it's a missionary position. I think we call it.
Well, don't know about that. I think it was bent over double with his hand between his legs. But anyway,
maybe. But that was hilarious. But yeah, fine tuning. I think that's probably the best theist argument I can think of. I think it actually. I mean, it's not great, but it at least it's not sort of begging the question or sort of affirming the consequent or something like that. At least it's got some sort of I think it's got some sort of
merit.
It's got some it does have some merit to it. That if everything in the universe and it requires a lot of ifs kind of thing, and that's the problem with it. And most probabilistic arguments that involve a sample size of one, like things about the universe and probability, you have to apply Bayesian analysis to it. And Bayesian analysis requires assumptions, unfortunately. But if those assumptions are correct, it is a strong argument. I would question the assumptions, but and so it requires a lot of ifs. If the universe there's only one universe, and if it could form in any way, and if these variables are constant and there's no other way the universe would form, it is highly unlikely it could form by chance because the chance would be so low. It does have some merit, but it's not great.
I mean, the way I described it earlier, I think I said that this is my favorite argument as well, although it's a terrible argument. But it just took me longer to work out why it was a terrible argument over all the others. Just to mention some of the others, Xbox, do you want to just say some of the others quickly for me before I go back to fine-tuning? Actually, we'll say them at the end. For me, the fine-tuning one, and I've I've gone to Otangelo on this several times, and every single time he just go, I don't know what you're talking about, Simos. The probability distribution is the assumption, which is the big flaw for me. So they assume that if you change a particular value of any particular constant, then we couldn't have life. I think that's the rough point that they're making. And this major assumption is that they assume that there is, in fact, a uniform distribution of the constants, right? And that isn't necessarily so. That's an assumption that they can't prove, but B, they're completely unwilling to like identify with, because it is the big flaw as far as I'm concerned. Now, when I say that, it's just to go over it quickly, right? So it's like saying if I pick a card out of a deck of cards, right, there is a 1 in 52 chance it's going to be the ace of spades, right? The ace of spades counts for life existing in the universe in this case. But of course, that makes the assumption that all the cards are different, and there is a different card. Every other card is different to the ace of spades. That's what makes it 1 in 52. If all the cards are ace of spades, right, then it doesn't matter what card you pick out, you have a life-giving universe. And so that's the basic flaw of the argument that they're making, is that the distribution of the ace of spades is in fact 1 in 52. And you can't tell that unless you pick out 52 cards. And we don't have 52 universes, so there's no way they can demonstrate it. Go ahead.
In a cyclical universe, you would just keep drawing until you found the ace.
Well,
yes,
sure.
I'm not saying that there aren't other arguments against it. All right, I'm just saying this is the argument. This is where their argument fails when they say that there is a percentage chance that the constants have to be 10 to the whatever chance that it could be so and so, and if you change it by a microscopic amount, we have no universe because it couldn't, planets couldn't come together, or it would never expand.
Yes.
Right? This is the kind of thing they say. And yes, a multiverse, of course, instantly, diffuses that thing, obviously, because you can have an infinite number of universes, which is
or cyclic, anything, any model with multiple,
or cyclic,
yes, any model with
or whatever you want.
Well, even mentioning that with the planets and all that, that's just the chance of this type of universe. Maybe there's a universe where the laws of physics are different. Maybe there's one where instead of planets,
there are other arguments. I'm not saying that, Hillary. I'm not saying that.
Yeah,
but this is why I don't like it, because even given all of their assumptions, right, it still doesn't work. Right? This is the point. I'm granting that there's one universe. I'm granting that God made the universe. I'm granting that. Right? They can't know that it is fine-tuned.
Because it's couched in the assumption that the constants of the universe have to be this way in order for it to form. That's what I was talking about when you assume that the constants have to be like this. Like, for instance, if gravity is a different type, then sort of the Big Bang never gets really started and the expansion of the universe doesn't occur. It just collapses in upon itself. So you've got to... So they're assuming these constants are required for any universe to form, right? So that I think is a stretch. I completely agree that that's a stretch. It's an assumption. It's a part of Bayesian analysis that you have to, in order to make any statistical data analysis, you have to put these sort of assumptions in the beginning. You have to analyze with these things laid down. Because we don't have a...
Yeah, you were going to say it. Go ahead.
Yeah, we don't have a sample size that can accommodate any meaningful statistical analysis at all. So, but it does work if these assumptions are true, and that's a huge if. Don't get me wrong, Simos. I get what you're saying. That's a massive if. But if those assumptions are correct, then Bayesian analysis says the statistics of a universe forming, like that's forming, not just supporting life, but even forming, is incredibly low. I just think that they have stretched way too far with the sort of the initial conditions of the Bayesian analysis.
Yeah, no, my argument completely undercuts using even Bayesian analysis to prove a point here. You can't, that won't work. That just will not work. Even if I grant you all of the things that you want in the Bayesian argument, it still doesn't work. Right? Because you are assuming, as I'm saying, in order to get this extremely rare probability of the universe existing like it does, right? Because these constants are so fine-tuned, right? Well, that makes the assumption that you know that it is fine-tuned in the first place. And the reason we can't assume that is because we don't have a distribution for where the constants will be, right? If I say the constant of gravity is such and such, and if you change it by a very small amount, well, how do you know that it couldn't be any other way? How do you know that? You don't. You are assuming that you can actually get a probability based upon how small the change you make is. You can't get a probability based upon that. Because it could be that the range at which universes the range at which gravity has this value, right, is extremely large, like near 1. Gravity could be it's only possible for the gravity to be this value. And if that's the case, what's the chance of gravity being that value? It's 1. It's not 10 to the minus something or another.
That seems like it would
why is
tend to be.
the probability 1 of gravity being that way?
Well, because of the card analogy. If ace of spades is gravity being at such a value, how do you know that the pack you're pulling the card from doesn't have all ace of spades? Therefore, you don't.
Well, yes, but yeah,
the assumption that's made.
The whole assumption is that it could be any value.
Right, and that's an assumption which is unfounded.
Right. No, I don't disagree with that.
Right.
But
so
that
every single fine-tuning argument fails on that basis alone, because you cannot
but
predict
you granted
the distribution.
Me that. You granted every single assumption I had to make.
I'm not granting, right? I'm granting that there is one universe. I'm granting all of those assumptions, right? I'm granting that the value of gravity is X. I'm granting all of that.
No,
what I'm not granting is
could be anything.
No. I'm not granting that the probability of gravity being anything is 10 to the minus, or being any specific thing is 10 to the minus. Gravity could be anything, but it could be that anything else is 10 to the minus 43, and gravity has, the rest is this value. And it's called the probability distribution, right? So I could say, like the card point, I could say, right, well, 51 cards are the ace of spades. 51 cards are gravity being what it is. The 52nd card is the King of Hearts, which is gravity being any other value. Look at it that way.
Oh, I understand that. Yes, yeah. I do.
So when you pull a card out of the deck, it's not 1 in 52, is it? Just because you pull an ace out, the ace of spades, because there's 51 ace of spades. It's actually 51 over 52, the chance of pulling the ace of spades. Right? You grant that, yeah?
Yeah, no, I get that.
Okay, so any other value is the King of Hearts, and there's only a 1 in 52 chance that you pull that.
Right, but would you acknowledge that there's literally almost an infinite amount of other values?
Yeah, I'm not saying. I'm saying that 52 is equivalent to any other value. The King of Hearts is equivalent to any other value, and this could be a large number of cards, not just any one, and there could just be one card which is any other value. So again, I'm simplifying the probabilities to make it understandable.
I can say it a little bit differently.
But it's exactly the same. Well, the technical term is we don't know what the probability distribution is. And it could be that this value of the probability distribution is 1. It could be that all possible values of gravity are this. Right? And that's not the argument I'm making. That's just one
Right.
example of what I'm saying to the extreme. Because I don't have to grant that it's all going to be 1. It could just be like the King of Hearts version, right? Could just be that it's extremely unlikely, so improbable, that the value of gravity is something else. And again, I'm not saying that I know that it is that. I'm just saying this is the flaw in the argument of saying gravity, if you change it by a smidgen, right, then the chance of the universe existing to make life is 10 to the minus 43 or some shit, right?
Right.
10
We
to the
can't know
90 or
that
something.
because we only have a sample size of 1.
Exactly. So we can't tell what the probability distribution is. We have no way of knowing what the probability distribution is. So the whole fine-tuning argument just goes out the window straight away from there. Do you get that?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I mean by saying we don't need to go down the, like, we can grant, like, yes, there's one universe. We can grant, yes, there's a value for gravity. Right? We can still grant all of that stuff, and still the fine-tuning argument fails. So there you go. That's just what I was getting to. I'm not disputing you and Hillary's kind of like, well, there's also this argument and this argument. It could be.
Yeah.
It could be in infinite universes. It could be multiverse, 10 to the 500 universes, or whatever string theory says it is. It could
Well, it
be
could be an eternal
cyclical.
universe as well.
Yeah, I guess. Although that kind of, I would grant them the force of, like, it seems that the universe came from a singularity, and therefore it seems that there is at least an initial point in our space-time. It doesn't mean that the fine-tuning argument doesn't work still, but I'm just saying. I try and grant as
you
much as
mean
I
like
can of
off
these arguments.
You mean like off of the expansion, say, of
Yeah,
this
Hubble's law. Yeah.
known universe? You can make that argument, but it still wouldn't get you past the plain time and to God.
Well, it still doesn't give you any idea of what the probability distribution is of any of the constants. We don't have a physics theory of everything.
Beyond that. Beyond the
We've got
expansion,
no way of
we have
knowing.
no
I mean,
idea.
every single one falls right at the first hurdle, and there's no need to go to the second hurdle. Although people do, right? I grant people do. So yeah, and I think the force of it. And again, I've read, like, I was in a debate with somebody, and a physics guy came in and was making a similar argument to what Mark's making, really. And I put this point forward, and he just went, "Oh yeah, of course, yeah." And then the other guy said, "Well, Luke Barnes says," because Luke Barnes is obviously a physicist, right? Who thinks that the fine-tuning argument is real. And fortunately, this physics guy had Luke Barnes's book, and sent me in the private chat a little section out of Luke Barnes where he says, we don't know what the probability distribution is of the constants.
Right.
So even Luke Barnes is saying he doesn't know. So yeah, and that seems to me the best apologist currently for the fine tuning, anyway. So yeah, that's where I go with it. And every time I've used that argument on somebody who's put forward the fine tuning, mainly D'Angelo, he just says, I don't understand what it is you're talking about. I don't understand what a probability distribution is. So I'm like, well, okay, if you don't understand the question, what can I do?
Yeah, I don't follow it completely either. I'm not smart enough to, with probabilities.
You get the card analogy, though.
But yeah, no, I understand it when it's explained.
Yeah,
it's just not something I would understand just under all circumstances. But that's because I've never gotten into
well, no, you got the force of the argument,
or percentages. And
No, you got the force of the argument as soon as you said, like, well, there's only one universe. Well, the fact that we only have one demonstrable universe to examine it means that we will never know what the probability distribution is.
Right. Yeah.
Because we would have to draw all 52 cards in order to know exactly what the probability distribution is. The reason the card analogy is so good is that it shows you the force of the argument when people say there's only one universe to demonstrate what fine-tuning is. Right. Because it says, okay, well, we've got one card out of 52. Do we know what the others are because of that? No, we don't know what the others are because of that.
I'll quickly say on that, or ask you on this. Do you have to know all the other universes that are potentially out there, and the ones that have failed?
No, it doesn't. That tells you nothing about the probability distribution of this universe, which is where the argument is so powerful.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, and it might be, as Mark says. I mean, those Mark and Hillary put forward great arguments against fine-tuning, right? I'm not saying that you can't say, yeah, but how do you know it's not a multiverse? Only, that we don't have any falsifiable physical theory which says there is a multiverse. So, their rebut is, well, that's I guess their rebut could be, well, one thing we do know is we have this universe. One thing we do know is gravity does have a value. I mean, that would be a rebut against their position, but I don't think it's a strong one either way. Because, like as you're saying, it's a Bayesian argument, so it falls on the probability, the prior probabilities.
And the other, it would have to start with us knowing that the other universes are there, some evidence of it, but then knowing the, what gravity is there, what forces are there, and compared to ours, it would get into a much bigger mess to sort out.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be.
I think so.
Just the evidence that they exist wouldn't be enough to figure out.
No, absolutely. Even if we knew that there were other universes, we wouldn't be able to tell what their probability distribution of constants is.
Right. Yeah.
Any particular constant, and that's the thing. A lot of people get confused when I say it that way because they're assuming that, oh, hang on a minute, there's so many constants, and that you're drawing from all of the constants. No, the probability distribution is referring to a particular value of a particular constant. Again, that's why I think the real force of it comes from. And I won't use the multiverse theory anymore or anything like that, just because I think this one is so on point when it comes to their argument. Right? Instead of saying, oh, hang on a minute, your argument is an argument from ignorance, I'm saying, well, it's not just an argument from ignorance in terms of trying to calculate that there couldn't be other universes and we happen to be in the universe which does have this value. I'm saying, even if we have this value, you're still giving me an argument from ignorance. So I can grant you the value, fine, but you're still making a logical error.
I think
so, that's why I think it's so strong anyway.
I think Lucky Wolfen in the chat had a perfect version of the argument that made more sense to me.
What's that? This one here, maybe?
Yeah.
The order of the universe is now just throwing a pack of cards in the air and all of them landing in order of suit, color, and number. Yes, that's exactly the same argument. And if they're all aces, they'll all come up with the same value.
But go down about 5 comments and you'll see my rebuttal.
1, 2,
yeah,
3,
I think Lucky's sort of getting at that the assumption is made that it is equal value to be any number kind of thing. That's the assumption that's being made.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
That's what the fine-tuning people do. They give what's called an equal distribution, probability distribution, and that is an assumption which they can't justify.
Well, that's one of many assumptions they can't justify.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. Yeah. But the point is, again, that comes back to Xbox's objection. Well, there's only one universe, so how could you possibly know that if you change it by a slight amount? And there's also the Sean Carroll objection, right? He came up with an extra one saying, well, look, you're the one changing the value of the constants. How do you know what would happen in physics? We don't know. We don't have a theory of everything. So how could we know what changing any one theory on any one constant would have the effect of? Right? It's science fiction to change them. Right?
I think that's a good point. That was Sean Carroll, was it? Interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
With his debate with William Lane Craig, I think.
Maybe we'll get a quantum computer and put an AI to it and let them hash it out.
Yeah, Chat GPT will get it sorted. Don't you worry, it will come up.
Oh
and say,
yeah. Chat GPT, the most accurate thing.
Well, there was an interesting thing that Spooky posted actually in on Discord somewhere.
Spooky Bedhair?
Spooky Bedhair posted it, yeah, which was people were using Chat GPT to translate cuneiform tablets.
No. Oh.
Well, I don't think that's a bad idea, actually. I think that's a pretty good idea.
You might get Zachariah Kitchen.
It doesn't fact check anything. Look, the worst I've seen is flat earthers using ChatGPT to get citations. That's the worst I've seen.
Yeah, that's true.
So you look up these citations and they just don't exist. Like you go, even something Google Scholar or whatever, they don't even appear because they're just words put together in what seems like an order. Using ChatGPT to do anything that is fact-based is insanely... Like, you have to fact-check it yourself. You can't just ask it to provide you with something factual.
For sure.
Ben Shapiro got on there, asked how tall he was. It gave him the wrong answer. It said like 5'3".
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, where did you get that from? It told him like IMDb. So he goes, where did IMDb get that information from? It's like some other site. And where did he get that from? Wikipedia, which says he's 5'7". So he asked it again, how tall is Ben Shapiro? And it's like 5'7".
Yeah, but it's not actually checking to see whether that's where it got it from. That's what you've got to understand. That it doesn't check to see whether that's where it got it from. It's making up. It's putting together a response that is an amalgamation of all the responses of that question on the internet, right? So basically what it's doing is going, how do people on the internet answer this question? When the question is asked, where did IMDb get this thing from? It's just going through the responses to that question out there on the internet and going, put together something that would be a response that people make. What it's not doing is actually checking to see whether that's actually where it got it from.
Yeah, it's based on a linguistic model thing that I tried to get Deepak on here, Simos, again, but he was busy.
Who is that?
He actually works for Google. And their AI stuff. And so
that's why I was quite interested. That's why I was interested when it said, helping people, translate the cuneiform tablets, because I thought, well, it is a language model, so maybe actually when I think about it, the reason I'm impressed by that, just to quickly make the point, is look, there are so many cuneiform which remain untranslated. That just putting into some kind of, having a rationalization of all of the language models that do translate cuneiform, and then asking ChatGPT to try and use that to go through this, actually is a really good way of time. Does it mean that they're going to be correct? No, it doesn't. Does it mean that they're going to be 90% right? Well, maybe there is a percentage that they'll be right, in which case checking them is going to be quicker than actually starting from scratch and translating them. Although inevitably we're going to have to rely on experts to do it rather than ChatGPT. But nonetheless, it could speed the process up, which is what really impressed me. Go ahead, Mark.
No, it's just yeah. No, I think I've sort of I think that all it will do is amalgamate what people have said the translation is, whether it be accurate, inaccurate. I think, will it get 90% of it right? I don't know. I have no idea.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I agree.
I think relying on the internet to provide factual information is a mistake, and you can outsource that to an AI all you want. It's still a mistake.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say. A guy on Clubhouse last week or the week before. He's a Christian, or supposed. If not, he's a Pope. But he got his whole argument from ChatGPT, and then just uses that. Again, like the argument's just messed up.
Yeah. Well, you can convince GPT of certain things. Like, who was it? Was it Jungle Jargon that was saying that they went onto Grayson's channel, and it was hilarious because they were basically saying that ChatGPT was saying that God is real, kind of thing. And it took him hours and hours and hours to train this thing to say that God is real. And you can do it by tricking it in its algorithm. You can do it by providing it with certain assumptions that it has to make that isn't against its sort of filter, and then sort of, encouraging it to think in or to find the result in a certain way. But the hilarious part was he went on to Grayson's and couldn't get it to agree with him again, which was just hilarious. But there's people out there that think if they can get ChatGPT to agree with something, then it is necessarily true, and it's ridiculous. Like, it's not what the algorithm is designed to do, or the machine learning is designed to do. It's designed to compile responses from the internet in a way that is intelligible to us. That's all.
Yeah. I like somebody.
It suffers from the GIGO, the GIGO principle, which is garbage in, garbage out.
Oh yeah. No, somebody made ChatGPT make two arguments which directly contradicted themselves about ChatGPT. That was the funny thing. So it couldn't even get that right. You know what I mean? When it was the expert which was being kind of like being appealed to. Okay,
the problem is people think it's an expert. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
It's not.
Absolutely. Okay, so what I'd like to do quickly is just to go around, and we're going to finish up here. But what I'd like to do is just go around and just say, I guess, what is if there was an overall flaw that all of the arguments had, and we haven't mentioned all of them, have we? We've, like you said in private chat there, there's some other ones which you wrote, the Kalam, the cosmological argument, contingency, the ontological argument, the
minimal facts.
Gary Habermas, argument. All of these arguments. Is there something which really represents or says to us atheists, if there's an overall defining factor as to why they're wrong? They're all wrong in slightly different ways, but is there something in common, or are there a very few groups that they fall into? What do you think about that? And we'll pass that over to Hillary to start us off with that.
I can't say it's common to all of them, but it's typical with most of them that they rely on hidden assumptions or like linguistic tricks.
Okay, thank you very much. And what your favorite argument, having heard everything that's been said, is there one?
No.
Okay. To the point, as always, Hilary. Thank you very much.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
Including making empirical predictions. Yes, that is true, Nadia. Thank you. You're still on the light argument, so that's fair enough. I'm just trying to put them up, but I can't see. Logical fallacies, like he says, is the commonality. Mark, what would you say?
Yeah, and to be more specific, I think the major one in most of them is begging the question. I think that they would, like Hilary said, make assumptions that they don't really have a proper sort of justification for. I mean, someone brought up a William Lane Craig debate, which I must admit I'm not, I can't remember that one. I've got to watch it again, but the William Lane Craig is just sort of, he does beg the question. He does sort of make assumptions about, like, for instance, the Kalam. He makes assumptions about, it must be a personal, sort of timeless, spaceless, fill in the blank. I think that's sort of overreaching. I think that begging the question is the one that they sort of fall into most of all. Yeah.
Okay, and are you awake, Headless?
Yeah, I'm awake.
Okay. Having heard the debate or what we've all said and stuff, is there any concluding remarks?
I've been listening.
Yeah, I know. Any concluding remarks, or do you think there's a bucket which you can throw all of the arguments into?
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's a bucket. It's the observable universe.
What do you mean by that?
Well, around us there's a bubble, and that's our observable universe. We can test and observe everything within that. Outside of that, we have no knowledge of it. It's still part of the universe, but we can't see or observe or test it.
Yeah.
So making claims.
So anything outside that bubble, you have no knowledge of. You have no way of ever having knowledge of it. So how can you say the stuff outside that bubble exists or doesn't exist?
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah,
and also going back to what Floyd had brought up earlier there about negatives. It was very popular many years ago for James Randi when he finally did before he got his final proof there, about you don't have to prove a negative, or you can't prove a negative. Yes, you do. You made a knowledge claim. If you stand up and say God does not exist, prove it. Especially when you hold the theist to the fire when they say God does exist. Why do you get the privilege of not having to prove your work?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it depends if you're saying you believe God doesn't exist or whether you're claiming that knowledge, right?
The old arguments were God exists, God doesn't exist. They never really brought belief into it, or at least no one ever really used the word belief. So if you're saying it doesn't exist, then prove it. Even if the theist said that they believe God exists, they still had to prove it.
Right.
That was
They're
the
making
crux
a claim
of the
about
arguments
reality.
everyone made. They made a claim. Atheists wanted proof. Well, then, atheists, where's your proof?
Okay, so let me just paraphrase, if I may, if you agree with this. So you're saying basically most of these arguments, if not all of them, are arguments from ignorance followed by shifting the burden.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
We can close out with this. If you're walking alone on a beach and you find a pocket watch, what do?
Pocket it.
Pick it up.
You look around and make sure you're truly alone. You pocket the damn thing. You walk away and say nothing.
It depends what it's made of.
You don't ponder about the maker.
Yeah, it depends what it's made of, to be fair. But anyway, Xbox, over to you.
Yeah, I agreed with everything everybody before me said. I'll also agree with the point you had made and that Nick had made early on. Most of these arguments from the theistic side, whether they're Christian or not, come down to a God of the gaps or a appeal to ignorance. On the atheist side, the only weakness that I see, because I do agree, you're making a claim about reality, whether it's a knowledge claim or a belief claim, you're making a claim about reality. So it needs to be backed up. It doesn't have to be some strong justification. It could be just, I feel that way. But I think on the atheist side arguments, they tend to try to knock down certain gods. A lot of the arguments that we talked about, the arguments of evil and things like that, they go towards a particular specific god that has a particular specific definition. And if that gets changed, that argument's no good anymore. So it kind of gets tossed in the bin and another one tried to come up with. That's not all atheist arguments. I think just a lot of them suffer from that. And other than that, I really have nothing more to add. I think
okay, thank you.
We covered a good
Yeah, that's
set
a
of areas.
good point, Xbox. That's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for coming on. I'm going to end the show there. Welcome to Tux. Thank you very much for dropping by. Please rewatch. There's been some good chat going on. Nadia, thank you for being in the side chat. Always great points. This Tog, thank you. Please come on sometime. We'd really like to hear from you. Obviously, who else have we had? Floyd, thank you always, Floyd, for coming on. Jay, thank you, Jay, for being there. Michael came on. Oh, yes, having someone from a philosophical bent is always a big bonus. Fabio, not so much.
Wow.
Titan,
Wow.
Titan,
Shots
thank
fired.
you. Thank you, Titan. Again, always welcome. And many others as well. I can see in there somewhere. Beck as well, going to the top. Anyway, so thank you very much. Headless, thank you very much. Hillary's a regular, thank you always. I love you to that t-shirt. I've had sex daily, dyslexia. Yeah, very clever. Thank you very much indeed for that. And we will see everybody next week, hopefully, for another version of the one and only program, which is